The moment that shocked everyone didn't come from a royal insider or a British critic or even a tabloid journalist. It came from a man who had once defended her, a man who had publicly backed her story, a comedian who had mocked the monarchy itself. And yet suddenly on live television, Trevor Noah looked straight into the camera and roasted Meghan Markle so sharply that the room froze. Because when the last defender flips, the silence that follows is louder than any joke. And that's exactly what happened.
Queen summoned everyone to a private meeting. Everyone attended except Meghan Markle. And I'll be honest, I don't blame Meghan for not going, because nothing good happens when white people invite you to the countryside. We've all seen Get Out. We know how this shit ends.
Give me those keys. Rose, now! Now, the keys! Oh, be careful, bro.
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
Damn!
I think Harry's a f***ing twat. Like, my life was so hard. Everybody's f***ing life is hard.
Yeah,
you were
true.
the prince of a goddamn country who dressed up as a f***ing Nazi, and now you're trying to come back as the Pope? Suck it.
The 60 Minutes interview was a great chance to hear Harry and Meghan's story in case you missed their 2-hour sit-down with Oprah or their 6-part Netflix documentary.
What made it so explosive wasn't just the joke. It was the betrayal of expectations. Trevor Noah wasn't supposed to be the one saying it. He had defended Meghan before. He had criticized the monarchy. He had framed her story as a symbol of modern racism colliding with ancient tradition. But suddenly the tone shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable, because somewhere between the interviews, the documentaries, the memoirs, and the endless explanations, something changed. And people began noticing the pattern, the contradictions, the strange marketing around what was supposed to be a love story. It all seemed to start when their son Archie was born. A moment that should have cemented the fairy tale instead began raising questions. Quiet ones at first, then louder ones, because the royal narrative used to shape history itself.
I know some people are disappointed by the name Archie, but there's one person who's super excited, the Queen. Yeah, because you know for the last 9 months, she's been like, please don't be Jamal, please don't be Jamal, please don't be Jamal.
For centuries, royal marriages weren't celebrity gossip. They were geopolitical events. Kingdoms traded power through marriage alliances. Wars were prevented. Entire empires were stabilized by who married who. And now, suddenly, the Martin royal drama looked less like history and more like Hollywood. A duchess who used to star on television. A prince who walked away from the palace. A Netflix deal. Podcasts. Interviews. Book deals. It started to feel less like tradition and more like branding. And then came the moment that comedians couldn't ignore.
Now it's like, my wife actually does a pretty good Timon. You should hear her. Come on, baby, do the thing. Hakuna Matata, do the thing.
The clip spread everywhere because it perfectly captured what people were whispering. The image of a royal couple once surrounded by palace guards now chasing Hollywood opportunities on red carpets. The fall wasn't tragic. It was awkward. And comedians smell awkwardness like sharks smell blood. Suddenly, the late night circuit lit up. One after another, hosts started dissecting the story. Jimmy Kimmel was among the first to poke holes in the narrative because the explanation that had dominated headlines suddenly sounded strange when repeated out loud.
Harry said racism was a big part of their decision to leave, which you know things are bad at Buckingham Palace if they came to America to get away from racism.
The idea that America was the escape from racism made comedians pause, not because racism didn't exist elsewhere, but because the irony was so obvious it practically wrote its own punchline. And then the next wave hit when Prince Harry released his memoir. 600 pages of personal grievances poured into bookstores, and late-night writers suddenly had a goldmine. What stunned audiences wasn't just the jokes, it was how easily the story shifted from sympathy to satire, because every new detail felt stranger than the last. The pretzel bag moment, the nicknames, the curated intimacy that looked less like romance and more like branding strategy. Even small details started becoming clues. Why did everything feel rehearsed? Why did every emotional moment somehow align with a product launch or documentary release? The more interviews appeared, the more the questions multiplied. Even simple nicknames between the couple suddenly felt like something else entirely. Comedians noticed it immediately. The way they called each other M and H as if they were unveiling a fashion label instead of a relationship. The forced intimacy, the scripted affection. It made people wonder if the romance itself had become content. Even wax figures of the couple became part of the joke circuit because their public image had grown so exaggerated it barely required exaggeration anymore. And then came the business ventures. Luxury jam jars, lifestyle branding, carefully curated California living. Every announcement came packaged like a product reveal. Critics started asking a question that no one had dared ask earlier. Was the fairy tale actually a business model? The comedians kept pushing, one joke after another, each sharper than the last. And suddenly, something strange happened. What began as a few isolated punchlines turned into a full-blown comedy avalanche. Every late-night desk, every stand-up stage, every sketch show. One by one, they began dissecting the same contradictions, the same mysterious tension between wanting privacy and constantly stepping in front of cameras. And when comedians sense a contradiction, they don't whisper about it. They amplify it, louder and louder until the entire culture hears the echo. Because the real twist wasn't the jokes themselves, it was the pattern. A prince who said he wanted out of the spotlight while signing massive media deals. A duchess who claimed she wanted a quiet life while launching brand after brand. The narrative kept colliding with reality. At first, the public laughed nervously. Then the laughter grew louder. And suddenly, the fairy tale that once dominated headlines had transformed into something else entirely. Not a scandal, not exactly a tragedy. Something stranger, something more uncomfortable, a mystery of perception. How did the world go from cheering them to questioning everything? And if Trevor Noah, someone who once defended them, was now roasting them on live television, what did he see that everyone else was just beginning to notice? Because once comedians start asking those questions, the story rarely ends there. The moment the dam broke, the jokes didn't slow down, they multiplied. What had started as a few scattered punchlines suddenly turned into a full cultural shift, a wave of comedians, commentators, and satirical shows all circling the same strange contradiction that refused to disappear. Because once people began noticing the pattern around Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, it became impossible to unsee. Every new appearance seemed to confirm the suspicion. Every interview raised another eyebrow. Every documentary promised answers but somehow left viewers with more questions. And the comedy world, never shy about exploiting contradictions, pounced immediately. Stand-up comics took the stage and began dissecting the fairy tale piece by piece, starting with the simplest theory anyone could understand: fame. One comedian bluntly suggested the entire royal romance looked less like destiny and more like strategy, arguing that the moment Meghan married into royalty, an entire universe of attention, influence, and celebrity deals suddenly opened overnight. According to that interpretation, the castle wasn't the ending of the story, it was the launch pad. And once that idea entered the conversation, audiences couldn't stop replaying the timeline in their heads. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir, the podcasts, each project claiming to explain the pain of fame while simultaneously extending it. Critics began pointing out the contradiction with increasing boldness, and soon it wasn't just comedians making jokes, it was cultural commentators analyzing a new kind of celebrity formula. Some said the couple wanted sympathy while also building a media empire. Others said they wanted privacy while repeatedly returning to the spotlight to explain why they wanted privacy. But the paradox kept growing louder, and the louder it got, the harder it became to defend. Even animated satire joined the frenzy, because animation has a way of saying things that live television sometimes hesitates to say. Shows like South Park built entire storylines around the contradiction, portraying a royal couple marching through the world, shouting about privacy while carrying microphones and cameras everywhere they went. The satire landed because it didn't feel exaggerated. It felt like someone had simply turned the volume up on reality. In one scene, the couple wandered through quiet towns searching for somewhere peaceful to live, only to arrive with reporters already waiting. The joke worked because audiences had already noticed the same pattern. The louder the complaints about attention became, the more attention seemed to follow. Another animated jab came from Family Guy, where a quick throwaway gag reduced the entire situation to a single absurd image. Enormous streaming deals worth millions of dollars for content that people struggled to remember. It was savage precisely because it was simple. Meanwhile, political commentators like Bill Maher began analyzing the psychology behind the backlash, suggesting the real irritation wasn't the complaining itself, but the insistence that everyone must agree with the complaining. According to that view, audiences might have sympathized with a quiet departure from royal life, but the constant cycle of interviews explaining the departure made the narrative feel endless. Each explanation demanded belief. Each new project revisited the same grievances, and eventually the public reaction shifted from sympathy to exhaustion. Some commentators even pointed to the late Queen Elizabeth II and her famous philosophy, never complain, never explain, as the silent contrast hovering over the entire drama. For 70 years, she rarely defended herself publicly, and yet her reputation remained largely intact. The contrast between that quiet restraint and the modern media blitz surrounding Harry and Meghan became impossible to ignore. By this point, comedians weren't just roasting the couple anymore, they were diagnosing the entire cultural phenomenon around them. Some argued that modern celebrity thrives on victimhood narratives because outrage keeps audiences engaged. Others suggested the couple had simply underestimated how quickly public sympathy can evaporate once contradictions appear. The tragedy of the situation, according to some commentators, was that there may have been legitimate grievances buried under the spectacle. But once the narrative became entertainment, nuance disappeared. The story had transformed into a cultural soap opera where every move was interpreted through suspicion. Was this about justice, fame, revenge, branding? Nobody seemed completely sure anymore. And perhaps that uncertainty is the real reason the saga refuses to end, because the truth behind celebrity controversies is rarely simple. Somewhere between palace tradition and Hollywood ambition lies a complicated human story that no joke can fully capture. But comedians don't wait for clarity, they chase contradictions. And in this case, the contradictions kept multiplying. So when Trevor Noah delivered that unexpected roast on live television, it wasn't just a joke. It was a signal that something fundamental had shifted. The last defender had joined the critics. The laughter had turned universal. And once the entire comedy world starts laughing at the same story, the narrative becomes almost impossible to control. The royal fairy tale didn't end with a dramatic scandal or a shocking revelation. It slowly dissolved into a haze of satire, memes, and punchlines echoing across television studios and comedy clubs. Yet even now, the story feels unfinished because the cameras are still rolling, the interviews are still happening, the brands are still launching, and somewhere out there, another comedian is already sharpening the next joke, waiting for the next contradiction to appear, ready to turn it into a punchline that will echo across the world again.